All right, guys. Thanks for joining me on this weekend. I was thinking about this. My wife's away birding, so and here I am with my phone. My wife's away birding, and I've been doing regular housework, and because I took vacation, take the dog off, and I just started thinking about a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, it'd be really great to discuss the entire team, why they got even involved into wrestling. But before we even get going, I want to introduce the staff members of today. We've got Dan and Benny's own The Player, Benny Scala. Benny, how are you?
I'm doing great. Glorious Yankee victory at Tropicana Field today.
Well, congrats to you guys.
Score?
Yeah, capped off a nice weekend.
Well, that's right. You're a Red Sox fan, Bill. I keep forgetting about that. That's just terrible.
We've been hot. I'll tell you something more terrible, Mike, at least to your ears and maybe to Benny's too. But guess who threw out the first pitch the other day at Fenway Park?
Christopher Walken.
Who's that?
Mercedes Moné.
Oh, God.
I swear to God. I swear to God.
Get out of here.
Oh, jeez.
Totally, man.
Bottom of the barrel.
Yeah. So you guys can hate them even more, I guess.
Oh, man. Yeah. Like I needed a reason.
Actually, look, how does she look nowadays? I'm not digging that hair. By the way, that is Mr. Thursday Night, Mr. Phil DeCesare. Phil, how did she look? Like, how does she look?
Her pitch was good, I have to say.
Compared to her WWE days.
How does she look compared to that? I'm going to say a little different. Maybe a little older. Yeah. Not as Sasha Banksy as she once was. Definitely, I guess maybe maturing is the best word, I think, to describe her as far as the looks go. Yeah. A little bit different, I'd say. Maybe not.
I used to find her really, really attractive, Phil, and now I don't find her attractive at all. Maybe it's the hair. I'm not sure what the deal is there.
It's a little. She's a little too shined up, I think. Just a little bit too much. Whether it's makeup, whether it's hair, whatever it is, glitter. I don't know, but it is maybe just a bit much. Definitely.
Well, she's getting on in years a bit. I think she's 36, 37. She needs those little tricks there to make herself look good.
Yeah, but she's still
Benny. She's really that up. She's up there. I didn't think she was that high in the 30s. Really?
Yeah, I think she's about 36. I think she's born 86, 87 maybe. I could be wrong. You know what? I could be wrong.
No, you could be right. Actually, it's hard to tell now, man. It really is. It's definitely.
I think she was the same age, maybe a couple of years younger than Charlotte. I think Charlotte's 38.
Charlotte's a good. Yeah, she looks good for 38.
Yeah.
She looks good for any age, but yeah.
She does.
Yeah, Charlotte did, but I got to tell you, no one compares to Tiffany Stratton, dude.
Yeah, you've got this Tiffany Stratton thing going now, too.
I'll tell you what, give it a couple of years, and that's all we're going to be talking about is that young lady. I agree.
What's impressive about her is that she was a gymnast, and she's a pretty tall girl, pretty tall athlete, and it's impressive that she made it so far in gymnastics with that height. So it speaks to her athleticism tremendously. She really is something.
Booming metropolis of Prior Lake, Minnesota.
Yeah. Trained by Greg Gagne, of all people.
Trained by Greg Gagne, yes, that is correct.
Rounded it off to Minneapolis, but they're actually saying Prior Lake.
Well, Jim Brunzell's from a place called White Bear Lake. They've got a lot of those types of
towns. Been there many
times. Yeah.
But by the way, I think Beth says that Monet was born in 92. So what does that make her? 2002, 212, 222.
32.
That makes her like 32. Old. That's not bad. Yeah. So anyway, before we get on to the main subject, Bob Cook came on Monty DeFaro on Thursday, gave a great interview, but he didn't have such kind words to say about you and Dan. What was that all about, brother?
Yeah, what's the name of the show, Mike? Wrestlers and Matches That Made Us. Well, I'd like to start the show by naming some that didn't make me. And let's see, that would be any fucking wrestling match involving Bob Cook. Last night I couldn't sleep. So when I can't sleep, I'll pick up a book in an effort to read myself to sleep. And unfortunately, the book I picked up last night was the greatest wrestling matches of Bob Cook. And I say unfortunate because all the book had was 2 fucking covers with nothing in between. When he was on your show, he mentioned being on a podcast with 2 guys he never heard of. Well, Mr. Cook, we've actually been listened to in 40 countries around the world and have charted in 6. Now, I've read many a wrestling magazine in my life, and I don't remember you being on any of their charts. Maybe I missed PWI's Worst 500. Rumored has it you were at number 474, sandwiched in between Silvano fucking Souza and the continental fucking nobleman Joe Turco. And Dan and I are beyond blessed to have many classy gentlemen and true icons of the wrestling business on our show. Gentlemen like Dominic DeNucci, Ivan Putski, Bugsy McGraw, Steve Kern, and Bill Dundee. Now, they respected us, which you didn't do, and they also did something else you didn't do. They actually won fucking wrestling matches.
Wow, Phil, I don't think I've heard Benny drop so many F-bombs in the whole time he's been on this channel. I think Mr. Cook is really infuriated him here.
The one thing I can't tolerate is disrespect. Fuck Bob Cook.
There you go. You have to do it like the Iron Sheik will do it, Benny.
Yeah, fuck the Bob Cook.
Exactly. If you weren't at home, you could just spit.
Phil, before we get going, you want to give a shout out to everybody in the chat room, please?
Yeah, let's take a look. Who do we got? I haven't even looked yet. This is late for me. Jason Moaning. Hello. Foxhole Willie, our friend from Massachusetts. Another, of course, the Playmate is in the house, too.
Playmate in the house. All right.
Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. We'll await more of our late stragglers, though. I'm sure there are.
I don't see anybody in the chat room coming to Bob Cock's defense.
No. Well, I understand that Denny Brown has it in for him, too.
Hey, man. Denny and him want to have it out. I'm going to manage Denny.
I think you should. My money's on Denny.
All right. So I was hoping we'd get some younger guys in because I wanted to. So Max has now released the Iron Claw.
Yeah.
On streaming now.
I saw it.
So did you see it originally in theaters or just now?
In theaters. Back in November or whatever.
What was your thoughts on the Iron Claw after coming out in theaters?
Well, I have to agree. I heard someone else say it pretty well, that the previews made it look incredible, okay? The music, just everything made it look great. But, the movie itself, I mean, only because because I was there in real time watching it unfold, I know where the inconsistencies are, and I didn't appreciate the inconsistencies all that much. Again, I know, and I certainly think Kerry Von Erich was very miscast, okay? Detrimentally miscast. So I have that against the movie. Emotionally, I have to admit, I got sad at the end. I did. I teared up at the very end when Kevin was talking about having no brothers left. That really got to me. So if the movie, if the power of a movie is based on emotional reaction, it did get it for me. But as far as an adherence to the truth as we know it, honoring the Von Erichs, and it was really an incomplete story, as we know, too, because, again, we reference Chris Von Erich again, whom we were all exposed to back in the day and know of him. A tragedy no less important than the ones previous, part of the big picture, and for a movie to cut that out, I think was inexcusable. So, that's my thought. So
when I came out of it, I understand what you say that the Kerry Von Erich character was miscast, but Zac Efron was in such great shape, but he's still a small guy. Yeah. So if you were to get a big, bulked up dude, he would have really dwarfed the Kevin Von Erich character. So I kind of got that.
Yeah.
I always, at the time, I thought there was too much wrestling, and I thought there could have been much more, because it was a ready-made story for any wrestling fan, or it was a ready-made story. But I'm gonna make a left turn here. I watched it on Max now twice since I've been home on vacation, right, at nighttime. And the movie's much better than I originally had thought. I understand why they did the things they did, like when Kevin wins the NWA title, Kerry wins the NWA title, but then gets his foot amputated. They quicken it up for movie purposes, and the amount of wrestling wasn't as bad as I originally had thought. So I totally get it. You were a Von Erich guy, you were a WCCW guy, as I. But in the end of it all, it was a pretty damn good movie. It was much better than I originally had thought. So I'm going to make an adjustment here and make a change and say it's a must see for a wrestling fan.
Oh,
and if
sure.
you're a WCCW fan, and let's put it this way too. You know, everybody in life has their trials and tribulations, whether they grow up with tough parents, no parents, whatever the situation is. I imagine many men out there have grown up with very tough fathers who just you could not ring the bell to or answer the bell to. You know, it was never good enough.
Oh yeah.
That had to be. I was thinking about a person that had that relationship, and that Fritz, the guy who plays Fritz Von Erich. You believe you're watching Fritz Von Erich.
Oh, he's good. Yeah, he was good. And you know what? Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Good. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, regarding some of the other casting, we spoke to, as you know, Justin Race, and he thought that the portrayal of his dad, Harley Race, was really good. So, you know, I certainly couldn't dispute, you know, that, because that comes from, you know, the guy's son. So, you know,
I just didn't understand the need to have a interview before the matches. Originally, Phil, Benny, when I was watching it, I said, you show all these matches like Freebird, Harley Race, right? And Ric Flair against Kevin Von Erich, but you don't show the big one. And we're going to talk about it as we discuss about things that molded us.
Yeah.
Terry Von Erich, Ric Flair. But you know what? After watching it again, I understood it, because the crowd is so like that. I don't think they could have duplicated that crowd. If you watch that match, which I consider it's in my top 5 greatest matches that I enjoy, I don't think they could have duplicated that match. And so again, I think I was a little tough on the movie first time around, and now I realize, yeah, you know, it was a good test too. My daughter, who's not a wrestling fan, I told her to watch it, and she enjoyed it. A non-wrestling fan, she enjoyed it.
Oh yeah, as far as that human story, that human element, that emotional family story, you know, as dysfunctional as every family is, it was really very powerful. And again, brought tears to my eyes, you know, and I know the story, and I've known the story for 40 years, and it still evoked emotion from me. So yeah, it's got some strength, definitely.
Awesome. All right, let's kick this off, and I want, you know, everybody in the chat to weigh in too, because we want to hear your stories, how you became wrestling fans. So originally, I thought the matches that shaped us into wrestling fans, but let's call it the matches and or the wrestler who shaped us. I'm going to go with the elder statesman that started off, Benny, and respectfully, right? If you could tell me, like, what was the first moment that you decided you're going to be a wrestling fan?
Well, I mean, I got a TV for Christmas in 1967. I was 12. My parents were tired of me hogging up the TV to watch every sporting event, and not even wrestling that much. But, you know, the Knicks, the Rangers, the Yankees, the Mets, you name it. So I got a TV, bring it up to my room. Lo and behold, I'm screwing around with the, you know, the antenna, messing with the UHF. I discover on a Saturday night, channel 47, out of Newark, New Jersey, the Spanish station, and I see Lucha Libre, and I'm thinking, well, shit, like, it's just Spanish wrestling. That was the only thing. I mean, all the commercials were in Spanish, but the wrestling was in English. It was from the National Arena, Washington, D.C. Ray Morgan was the commentator, and, you know, they interviewed Bruno a couple of times, and then they mentioned that wrestling was going to be at the Island Garden in West Hempstead on April the 26th, and I asked my father if he would take me. I had never gone before. And that night, Bruno was facing Toru Tanaka in the main event. And I mean, you talk about having your heart in your throat. I mean, I literally thought Tanaka was going to win the match and walk out of there with the championship, but they started colliding off the ropes. And when they hit in the middle of the ring, it sounded like an earthquake. It felt like an earthquake. And for that 10 seconds, when the referee was counting over both of them, I mean, I about died 1,000 deaths, and finally Bruno got up at 9 3/4, and Tanaka stayed down. So, like, my world was intact. But then about 3 weeks, so that, I mean, I was pretty much hooked then. About 3 weeks later, my friend was going to the mall for his 13th birthday. It was late May. I bring my money. I was going to maybe, buy a couple of Mad magazines. I love Mad magazines back in the day. I see Wrestling Review, Wrestling World, and The Wrestler. And about 2 minutes after I went into the mall, I was broke. But I had my wrestling magazines, got home, and that day, that was it. And I mean, I've been hooked for the last 56 years.
Benny, let me ask you, what was it about San Martino? Was it because he was Italian? Like, what was it?
Yeah, because I remember before that, for some reason, they were, I think, on Channel 5 or Channel 9 for a bit. And it might have even been about a year before that. And somehow it was on. And Ray Morgan was interviewing Bruno. And he said, Bruno, how about a word for our fans in Italian, or our Italian fans? And I called my mother was in the kitchen, who spoke fluent Italian. And I said, Mom, will you translate? And she said, I want to thank my gracious fans for supporting me always. I'm forever grateful. And she goes, man, that's a really nice guy. That's a really classy gentleman. And that kind of struck me because, to me, they're a bunch of goons. But here's this guy. And Bruno was like, he was larger than life, just the way he was built and the way he carried himself. And it just, something about him struck me. And then here I am, 56, 57 years later. I'm still in awe of the guy.
Phil, did Bruno have the same staying power in the Boston area as he did in the New York Madison Square Garden area?
Bruno was unbelievably over, and the Garden was, if MSG was his home, then the Boston Garden was his vacation home, because Boston promoters would always put Bruno on the top of the card, even in later years, because they knew he drew. And again, you talk about the North End, you talk about such a huge Italian contingency, and again, Italian fans are, if nothing else, very faithful. And I don't think, they talk about Bruno's consecutive sellouts at MSG, but I think Boston was right up there too. And even made it out to Worcester. And back then it was only a 3,000 seat arena, but when they needed to fill the place, Bruno was called upon, and people turned out. So huge in Massachusetts, huge. Now, unlike Benny, I didn't get to see Bruno during his heyday, during his prime years. He came in after, was, around the Zbyszko feud or right after, and then he became a commentator. And then I saw the second or the third incarnation of Bruno when Vince kind of got him out of retirement to team with the son and so forth. But no, I hold Bruno in high regard too, for many of the reasons I think that Benny does too. Just what a great athlete, just a great statesman, great performer, and just all around awesome. And the Italian thing doesn't hurt either. Okay, coming from Italian family too, definitely doesn't hurt.
I remember before I became a wrestling fan, my father bringing me to the matches at the Comac Arena, which is a venue right here on Long Island. Actually, where it used to be, it's probably would have been a couple of miles down from the house I live at right now. I haven't moved much, right? So tried to get out of here, but I can't seem to get out of here. But I remember seeing Bruno on a black and white picture with Vince McMahon Sr. and I believe it could have been Pedro Morales. And you could just see the size of Bruno. But I was still in formative years, right? So it's I wasn't looking at him, and I just saw this guy that looked really big, and you knew he was a big deal, supposedly, and that was it. So, Phil, when do you first get the bug to start watching wrestling?
Almost immediately. And one of the first matches I think that got me really hooked, I think, was a TV match. Of course, it was in Allentown. It was Martel and Gurria versus Fuji and Saito. And it was the infamous match where Rick Martel comes off the top rope, attempting a flying body press, and Fuji reaches in, grabs that packet of salt, and blinds Martel, and ends up pinning Martel and winning the titles. And for me, I was hooked then, because I bought it hook, line, and sinker. Patterson, and it was Pat and Vince in their baby blue outfits, the baby blue sport coats, calling the action, and they did it with such seriousness. It was just to me it just seemed so real, and it was just so dramatic. And having started to watch and really enjoying Martel and Gurria as the babyface team, and then seeing Fuji and the devious one for the first time in action, and it was an emotional experience. So I said I got to check this out, and of course Martel and Gurria won the titles back, and all was forgiven. But that's what really got me, I think. Back then, it was a tag team match of all things, too.
How over were Martel and Gurria though? Because that's when I first started watching, also, and it was like they were like the hot tag team for quite a while.
Well, they were, you know what, and again, this is the early '80s, still coming into a different era, and they were both in shape guys. They were both young at the time too, acrobatic. A sunset flip was a big thing back then, as you might recall. And just pondering it
that was the big move.
As like a 10-year-old kid thinking, how the hell do they do this thing? Of course, we went out in the yard and tried it too, and ended up on our shoulders and our heads and everything else. But it was amazing what really hooked us back then, and really a lot. It was less was more in that sense. It was much more emotional. There was a big build up. It was waiting for that hot tag. It was different. It really was. There was a more of an emotional component to it, I think, and the action meant more when it happened. So they hooked me right there. Yeah.
You know what bothered me about Martel and Gurria were the magazines. Remember they used to have the rankings, the championship, and blah blah. They were always never a top tag team. They were always 5, 6, 7. That used to drive me crazy.
I got to wonder what's behind that too, because they were in a market and they were seen by more eyes. They were the champs. New York at the time was the big territory still, and it was such a slight, to the WWF, doing that sort of thing, and I can't understand why. And and I guess they were, how could they be surprised years later when they're banished from the buildings? And Vince has his own cameramen and own writers and everything else now, It's almost like a little revenge,
I'm sure that Joe's mentor was probably getting a few kickbacks back in the day. I'd have to think. As much as I love him, I'm sure there was something going on. Benny,
I think so.
Coming off of the Bruno thing, what did Gurria and Martel mean to you? Phil told his story. That's the match that got him going. Did they have any lasting memories in your mind?
Not really. I remember Tony Gurria when he was the Rookie of the Year. The guy was giving him a mega push. He's wrestling guys like Tanaka on TV. Tanaka would never lose on TV, but Gurria was getting draws. He was getting wins over a Baron Cicluna. Then now they're putting him in tag teams, and he's winning with Haystacks. He won with Zbyszko. Who else did he win with? He won with Martel. He just
Dean Ho.
Yeah, Dean Ho.
Yeah, Dean Ho. Right, I forgot about it. Yeah, I think he won. Did he win 5 times with 4 different guys?
I think so. Yeah,
But
and Tony was his last. Rick was his last partner to bring him to glory.
And then kind of as after the mid '80s, Tony kind of slid down the part. But I always loved Tony Gurria, and I tell you, when he was on the show a couple of weeks ago, like I said when I posted in the comments, if that interview lasted 6 hours, I would have just started brewing some coffee, because I could have listened to you two guys talk about wrestling all night. I was always a big Gurria fan. Not so much even as he was a great tag team wrestler. I think what's kind of like underplayed now is the fact that he was a pretty decent singles wrestler when he was younger.
Yeah, and what a great accent too, huh?
Well,
oh my God!
Unbelievable.
And he's still jacked at like 70.
So for me, guys, Jimmy's the one that turned me on to wrestling. But in the beginning, I kind of still wasn't into it. The Sergeant Slaughter character I liked, but the Cobra Clutch challenge is what I really liked, because it was like I really wasn't into the wrestling part of it, but I was into this, having this type of move. But honestly, what changed it for me, and I don't know if you guys remember this particular interview, but it was Magnificent Morocco had just come into the WWE, and he's with the Grand Wizard, and he had the Asiatic spike. It's one of his, I think it might have been his first interview with McMahon right after a match. And he tells everybody, put your hands up to the television and feel the spike. Feel the electricity. I can't even imitate him anymore. It's been so long. But feel the electricity, feel the power. And I remember, you know, I was always an athlete, but that was the day I was like, man, I want to be big like these guys. Like, I got to figure out how these guys are so big, and I want to be big like that. And that's when I started hitting weights, right? Because I just wanted to be Don Morocco, man. He was just, you know, he wasn't a bodybuilder. He was just huge, you know?
Could land a plane on his shoulders, man, you know? Amazing.
I mean, you talk about being thick. That guy was thick.
You know, he worked out like a fiend, but he also was a surfer, man. And, you know, in order to get out to where those big waves are, you've got to paddle out and you've got to use those shoulders, man. And when I think about that whole beach bum idea, I mean, he lived it. He's out there in shark-infested waters, you know, catching waves. I mean, what a sight he must have been to see. Boy, those sharks would have had a good time if they got him.
But would you say
I also remember back in that day, they were into the chanting. Like, they would make nicknames for the bad guys, and the bad guys would get all mad and cover their ears. And the beach bum thing just wasn't working. Right. Like, they kept trying to force that beach bum thing, and it just would not work, right?
I love that.
But to me, he was one of the first cool heels.
Yeah, you know, you're right on that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It was hard to hate him because he was cool.
I mean, to me, the first cool heel ever, and a guy like, I guess he came to the WWF in, I think, 76, sometime with Superstar Billy Graham. Now, I mean, I was, you know, Bruno was my hero. I was not a heel guy, but the minute I saw Superstar Billy Graham, it was like, this guy is larger than life. Holy shit. I had never seen a human being not only look like him, but have the charisma that he did. And, I mean, that guy was off the charts.
He was the perfect foil for Bruno, too.
Yeah.
The exact opposite in so many ways.
But he was hard not to like.
No, I know. Yeah. Yeah, he got a lot of
do you guys still feel, I think I know your guys' answer on this, but do you feel that Graham should have been turned face and held on to the belt instead of Backlund?
I do. I think, you know, what they should have done is had him wrestle a tag match with Koloff, you know, while he was still champion, have Koloff turn on him. Yeah, you already got your first feud there. And you just go, I mean, why not give it a chance? I mean, the guy was drawing. He was drawing money. I can't imagine. I mean, the people wanted him to turn face. I can't imagine that would have failed.
You know, things happen for a reason in their own timeline, in their own way. And, you know, I do wonder what if they did turn Superstar to a face and get behind him and give him the monster push. But then I think, if that happened, would we ever have a Hulk Hogan? Would we ever have the Rock and Wrestling connection, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, a little after, too. But would we have these things? We needed a Bob Backlund for 5 years or so, maybe, just to develop, just to get that appetite for that new breed of champion, that giant, larger-than-life, charismatic, you know, what became Hulk Hogan, you know? Could we have had him? Would he have been successful? I mean, would Hogan even be around if we had Superstar then, you know? We would have already seen it at that point. There'd be no Hulkamania potentially, and the business would take an entirely different course.
You know, Phil, you give up. That's a great point, because that's where I think I was talking about McMahon, I think, with Jimmy on Thursday. And I think McMahon's been not only great at what he does, but he's also been very lucky at what he does.
Oh, sure.
Because I agree with you. If they go with Graham, there is no Hogan. And maybe what we know now doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a DVD. If someone knows a secret to strip a DVD and make it into an MP4, please tell me. But I have this DVD that's of the Freebirds, and it's been sold, but you can't find it anymore. And I don't know who's got it, but I'm telling you, I'd love to put it on the channel. But there's a phone call on there from Michael Hayes to the drummer of whatever band they were in, that saying Bad Street USA, right?
Yeah.
And he says that Vince wanted to put the title on him. And I was like,
Junior?
yeah, you know what? It's Junior.
On Michael
This
Hayes?
was during the Rockin' Wrestling. Yeah. On Michael Hayes. This is Michael Hayes' phone call. And I really want to post this stuff because it's on a DVD. I gotta have it in the back, but I gotta really learn how to strip it. But I was like, that could have been the worst move ever. And here's another thing, and I'm sure, Phil, you might know, Benny, you may know, and everybody in the chat may know, but I'll share it anyway. Do you know, before Hogan, Vince made a call to Fritz and said, I want Kerry up here to become the new champion. And Fritz wouldn't give him Kerry. Imagine if that would have happened. What a colossal mistake that would have been.
Yeah, well, you're right on that because the evidence bears it out. If you remember the Victory magazine, which was the WWF, before the WWF magazine, it was called Victory magazine, right? And this was maybe right around that era, and they did unlike, their other magazines before, the other editions, they did a feature on the Von Erichs, and I thought that was so cool, but it also made me wonder, why are they doing a feature? Why are they acknowledging world class? Why do they have the Von Erichs in this magazine? Maybe it has something to do with that. I don't know. But yeah.
Was Backlund was still champion when Victory came out?
I think so. And I'm sure I have that magazine somewhere too. Still, believe it or not.
So I am 100% sure that that's why they did that, Phil.
Probably.
And again, let's move to the next conversation. All right, so Benny, you're a WWE guy. When do you first discover another territory, and what makes you like that territory as much as, if not better than, the WWE?
Oh, I mean, I discovered, I guess it was 76 on Channel 41 out of Patterson, New Jersey, was NWA Hollywood. I'm thinking one night during the weekend, it was Blassie, the great John Tolos, right? And some guy named Java Rook. I'm thinking, what the fuck? That looks just like Johnny Rods. He even has the same boots as Johnny Rods. But I liked that because, I mean, it was something different. And I liked it. It was, definitely a little bit different than WWF. But then a couple of years later, got Championship Wrestling from Florida, which I really loved, with Gordon Soley. And just, it was a different brand of wrestling. A lot more color on TV. The storylines, I think, were way more intense. There was a lot more actual wrestling, a little bit less brawling. Definitely a lot more color. That's what I guess I have a hard time understanding, where today you have to be in Camp WWE or Camp AEW, where, I was probably watching maybe 6 or 7 different wrestling shows at one point. After a while, I got WCCW. I loved every single one of them.
It's amazing you say that, and about all these wrestling shows. And for me, and I think there was a discussion elsewhere before on what was maybe the greatest year in wrestling. And there's so many great years. And some arguments have been made for 1983, which of course was pre-Hulkamania. But it was a time where we up here in the Northeast had so many options on TV. I think we could watch about 12 hours of wrestling each week from all the territories. And you know what? As great as it was, it still didn't seem like enough back then. It was it was a golden age in many ways. It really was. And we can, of course, argue for the 80s, 84 and beyond. We can certainly argue mid to late 90s with the Monday Night Wars. Some people, the Attitude Era, perhaps. But that was kind of the golden age. Like you say, we just had so many great options, and the business was thriving. It was a wonderful time. And getting back to this whole thing about Superstar Graham and Hogan again, J.A. Will made a good comment in the in the crawl there, and he said something about Vince Sr. being a man of his word. And because Vince Sr. was a man of his word, he let Backlund reign for, however, from February 78 to December of 83, right? And again, I think that sets the stage or really whets the appetite for the next evolution in the figurehead, in the champion, in the new image going forward. So I think everything happened in
Well,
good time.
I not to interrupt you, Phil, but the other thing I think we forget, and that was a great comment by JA, but back then, right, there was a lot of turmoil between organizations, and the reality of it was Superstar Graham was not a tough guy. Whether people think he was or not, he wasn't.
He's just a hippie.
Backlund was a protector, right? Backlund was a protector over the WWE. When he was in studio, he tells a story, and if you read his book, you can tell a story. But no one would try to work, try to screw over Backlund, right? And believe me, there were calls made to try to get the WWF belt at that time.
Yeah.
With the champions, you had some tough champions: Harley Race, obviously Vern Gagne, right? You could have took something off. You could have took something off of Graham, whether it be by shoot or Graham. You pay him enough, he might have just let you do it. So the one thing I think Vince Sr. felt was two things. Number one, Backlund was going to be loyal no matter what. And number two, you were not going to screw with Bob Backlund. He would rip your throat out in real life.
And it's so funny, and I might have mentioned before, back in the Eddie Graham territory, back when Backlund was down there kind of getting his start, Eddie Graham was great for wanting people to try the wrestlers, to try to shoot, with the wrestlers and see what they can do. And they brought in this college kid. He was really a great amateur, but he's like 6'8", 300 pounds, and to go in there and try to shoot with Bob. Backlund put him in a headlock, a simple headlock, brought the guy down. The guy passed out. A simple headlock, okay? Just a testament to just how strong Backlund is. It's off the charts, Of course, everyone called him Howdy Doody back then and this and that, but I mean, he was a badass. He really was, and he seemed like a perfect guy to be champion in that regard, I think.
You know what I think is
I think it's another example in life where you don't know what you got until it's gone. And
Right.
Believe me, I hated Bob Backlund. I wanted him to lose every month. I was like, please lose. I hate you. I hate you. And I'll tell you what, now at my age, knowing the man and being that he gave me a great 5 years of hell, it was a good 5 years. It was like It was a little different than Pedro Morales. Pedro Morales as Intercontinental Champion was a headache to me, right? I was, Backlund was a good hatred. Pedro Morales was like a real hatred. I could not stand Pedro Morales.
I think that was Bill Watson's favorite wrestler. What's that, Benny?
No,
what was that, Benny?
Sure. I mean, Pedro was the WWF champion 10 years before that. To me, it didn't make any sense. Why'd you bring him back as the IC champion? I never got that. But I was going to ask you guys, do you think Vince Sr. purposely tried to emulate the NWA? Because, for 14 years, he had two, ethnic champions in Bruno and Pedro, neither one of who wrestled a whole bunch. I mean, they probably could, but they were brawlers. It was always a revenge kind of thing, where now you have a legitimate, like you said, a shooter. Nobody's going to mess with Bob Backlund, who was, to me, was more like a Briscoe kind of wrestler, and the prototypical white meat baby face. Do you think he did that on purpose and went away from the the Brunos and the Pedros?
I absolutely think so. I mean, that makes, absolutely. I mean, again, we had an Italian sensation, a Puerto Rican sensation. Now we've got the Minnesota boy, who looks so vulnerable, but really, and was anything but vulnerable, and I was a Backlund fan, unlike Mike. Mike was always rooting for him to lose. I was rooting for him to win, but in either case, you're watching from New York, I'm watching from Massachusetts. We're all watching. So, and that's ultimately what they're going for. You know, a lot of eyes on, and we were watching.
No, here's some confusion that took place Thursday night too. Did you both see the Dark Side of the Ring? The Black Saturday edition.
I haven't seen
finale?
Black Saturday yet.
No, but I saw it as it happened. I tuned into TBS that day when Vince was there.
Well, here's my question to both of you, and I brought it up to Jimmy, and Jimmy's like, I don't think it's right, and then Mitch Seinfeld even chimed in and said it was wrong. But Cornette said that Vince went down to the NWA meeting along with who was the guy that ran Georgia at the time, Phil?
Was Barnett or no?
No, what's his
ousted.
name? My boy, what's his name?
Jim Barnett.
Jim Barnett.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
the guy
right.
He used to smell his tie
Jim
and say,
Barnett.
"My boy." Yes,
My boy.
Barnett and McMahon went to the NWA meeting and resigned. But from all I read is that, and that's the other reason I think Backlund became champion, was that Vince Sr. disassociated himself from the NWA right before superstar Billy Graham loses the belt. Right? I think Graham wrestles Harley Race in Florida in that rainstorm, and he decides he's not going to, he still does business with them, trade talents and everything else. But from what I understood, he was no longer part of the NWA membership of board members who actually had an active vote. So when Vince and Barnett went down there to resign, I said, if they're not part of the active board, why would they resign? And Mitch was like, well, they were part of the board. It didn't make sense. Did you guys ever hear that Vince Jr. was still part of the NWA board?
I heard some rumor about it. I heard something about it at the time, but I find it challenging to believe. And keep in mind too that the WWF title lost world championship status in the magazines too around this time. So, is there a correlation there? I wonder. I don't know.
My understanding is when Vince bought that airtime on TBS, that he was supposed to do the equivalent of what they were doing was the studio matches,
studio wrestling,
and instead he just kind of used his own canned stuff.
He started doing some studio matches, but he pulled away from that pretty quickly. It just wasn't his style.
My understanding, Vince Jr. was never part of the NWA. I mean, he cooperated with them for a while, but I don't think. I'd have to do some more research. If I had a bet, I would bet that he was not.
They did go to meetings together, though. They went to the annual conventions, Vince Sr. and Jr. They attended together, so he was part of that, I guess, part of the McMahon family, and part of somewhat anyway, by extension, a member, I would say. But for how long were they members? They eventually dissolved that membership.
We need to check into that. So, Phil, what was your first discovery of an outside wrestling organization other than the WWE?
The magazines turned me onto it, but then television and cable took it to a whole new dimension, and I think it almost happened simultaneously. What came first? Georgia came just before World Class, maybe, up here. We had Georgia on cable on Superstation. We got cable in early 81. We got cable in 81, I think, and we got World Class on regular TV, VHF TV. So those two came in virtually at the same time, and again, which is really cool. I mean, you think of two different areas, Georgia and Texas, and just two different cultures, two different presentations. Obviously, the Von Erichs on one channel and Tommy Rich on the other, and it was unbelievable. And the nice thing is, one was on at 11 in the morning, the other was on at 6 at night, so you could watch them both. Again, we're talking about days before we even get our first VCR. I don't know if you guys remember when you got your first VCR. Oh, yeah. And again, when we talk about the war to settle the score, that was one of the very first things I actually taped on VHS. But that was around the first time. It was cable that brought us that. And then we started getting more offerings. We eventually got AWA in the later 80s, but we had Southwest Championship Wrestling for a run. We had some Mid-South on there too. It was just incredible, unbelievable. Just so much to watch. USA Network with the MSG shows, incredible.
Well, my big memory was, and I used to call Jimmy, is every so often you'd get the Capitol Center on a channel, like at 11 o'clock at night, or you would get like the Boston Garden, and we would be flipping out because like the Capitol Center was always behind the Garden. So I think I saw Jay will mention King Kong Mosca. When Mosca was done at the Garden, right? I think Mosca lost in 2 matches to Backlund at the Garden. He's now in a feud at the Capitol Center with Bob Backlund, and this is months later. Backlund's already been moved on to other guys. You know what I mean? He might have been on to 2 other guys by the time he's wrestling Mosca. And I always found that intriguing. I never saw Southwest, and I never saw Mid-South, but I used to catch Florida. I used to catch at midnights on a summer day where the worlds, were perfectly aligned, and you got the snow off the UHF. But I do remember the first time I catch world-class championship wrestling.
The theme
I got to tell you,
the timpani drum.
The minute I saw Kerry Von Erich.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Kerry Von Erich was like, I couldn't even believe what I was looking at. It was like Schwarzenegger. It was
absolutely.
like Schwarzenegger wrestling.
Mike, there's a picture. Did you ever see the picture of Arnold and Kerry together?
Yes, I have.
That's when Arnold was doing Conan. I think he had long hair.
You know what? I recently saw a picture of Kerry and the Ultimate Warrior, and I got to tell you something. Kerry is bigger than Hellwig.
Oh yeah.
I think Kerry had a better physique anyway.
Absolutely. That skinniest waist I've ever seen, man. Unbelievable.
That whole WCCW thing blew my mind. I was like, oh my God. Like, I think Benny opened up the show talking about not liking other like AEW, WWE. I kind of got it because I was always a WWE guy. So even though I watched Georgia Championship Wrestling, I still was like, I'm a WWE guy. When I saw WCCW, I was like, man, I like this much better.
Yeah. The camera work, Mike, was great, though. I mean, when you think about it, Benny, you remember the camera work in World Class? I mean,
oh yeah,
they were right in there, man.
I remember Chris Adams throwing that super kick. It was the first time I ever saw one. I was like, holy shit, what a move that was.
And they worked so well around the cameras. I mean, again, it was not only just state-of-the-art equipment for back then, but the cameramen were really good, and they where they needed to be, and they really brought you into that ring, into the sportatorium each week. It was.
But how about the one thing they did really well were the vignettes. The vignettes were so good, and the WWE when Vince took over Junior. He started to catch up on that a little bit with the Schultz things and the Orndorff ones. Like it was almost, he was kind of copying WCCW. I felt.
Oh yeah, and we talk about music and wrestling, and even before the Freebirds had Bad Street, of course they came out to Lynyrd Skynyrd, and all the Von Erich boys had their. Can you name the theme songs, guys? Here's a quiz question. I know our people in the audience might be able to. For the 3 Von Erichs, can you name their entrance themes?
You got the Rush.
Okay.
Can I
try first? This might be a wrestling test question.
Modern Day Warrior for Kerry, right?
What is that? Yeah. Rush, Modern Day Warrior, yeah. It's a good question.
What was Kevin?
Kevin was Ted Nugent's Stranglehold.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
And
what was Mike's?
I don't know what Mike's was. I don't know that Mike had one, actually.
David's was Yellow Rose of Texas, I thought, wasn't it?
That was once for that, but it was ZZ Top's LaGrange song,
Okay.
Remember that? Yeah.
All right,
ZZ Top were also huge Von Erich fans, by the way.
Here's my question to you. Jimmy's a David guy, right? Jimmy's a purist, right?
Yeah.
Who was the greatest Von Erich? David, Kerry, or Kevin?
That's a big question, huh? You know, at different times, I had different answers when I was a fan watching it. And, and we were all so lucky, I think, to see David in action as, in 1982 and 1983 into 1984. So we really we were blessed to see him almost every week on TV for a couple of years. And he was amazing, and again, he was a big guy too. So, I mean, that height was very impressive, and people talk about the psychology he had it. Kerry was just otherworldly, man, like from another dimension. He was just smooth as can be. And I can't believe when I hear all these stories about him being not in wrestling shape in terms of not having his head on straight. I've never seen it in the ring with him. I've never seen it. He was always, so smooth. He always seemed like he was where he needed to be. So, people talk about, substances and this and that. I just never saw it with Kerry from all the TV stuff I've seen. And Kevin,
all right, but who's the best Von Erich?
Oh, I don't know that I can answer that.
One
would almost have to say Kerry because he won the title, right? He was the NWA champion. You'd almost have to say that based on that.
What do you think? Player, were you a WCCW guy or not? Not at all.
I loved it. I mean, the minute I saw it, even like, this guy from Queens, New York. Where the fuck did they get Queens, New York for the Dingo Warrior? Like, with a name like Dingo Warrior, and you're hanging out in a street corner in Kew Gardens, But no, I like I said, Chris Adams. The first time I saw the super kick, it was great. I mean, they had so much talent. But I think David. I mean, I was just talking with my friend about, Thurman Munson versus Carlton Fisk. Thurman Munson was a far superior catcher to Carlton Fisk. The problem was Carlton Fisk didn't get in a plane wreck and die. He managed to play for 22 years. Munson played for 10. Munson's not in the Hall of Fame. Fisk is. Munson was 10 times a better catcher than Carlton Fisk.
Benny, on the Carlton Fisk front, I was at Fenway Park. It was my first game ever, the day that Carlton Fisk first returned as a Chicago White Sox. So
wow.
Yeah, it was pretty monumental.
I mean, the same thing with
So you guys had brought this up a couple of months ago, and I'm going to disagree. Johnny Bench was better than Thurman Munson.
Carlton Fisk was better
than
Johnny
Thurman
Bench
Munson.
was better. Who else was? He was one of the top.
Listen, in some cases, when people die, their legacy grows to amazing heights. What they could have been.
No,
let me ask you something. It's funny you bring this up, and I'll ask both you guys here. David Von Erich was awesome. Don't get me wrong, but do you think the way these wrestlers still talk about him? Do you think if he didn't die, would he have had the goods to be the NWA champion on a long-term basis?
I think he would have had multiple reigns. I do. Would he have been another Flair? No. I mean, but would he have been Flair's foil that, he might have won it from him, 2 or 3 times? Absolutely. He was not going to be a Tommy Rich or a Ronnie Garvin. He was going to hold the belt.
He was definitely not going to be an undersized champion because he would have come to power around the time of Hogan too. So, had David Von Erich lived, his reign would have coincided with Hogan's first run. Maybe they would want to have the NWA represented by a guy who was technically a little bigger than Hogan, at least, in stature, believe it or not, David was a little bit too. So physically could, compare well to Hogan in that regard. Imagine if David started training like Kerry and Kevin too and supplementing and the like, that would have been scary.
I was thinking to myself too, sometimes I don't give Ric Flair enough credit because Flair was wrestling in every every region, every territory against all different types of wrestlers. That's got to be a very hard job. And then I was thinking to myself, how lucky is Ric Flair? Because every time they wanted to finish Ric Flair off and put him out the pasture, something happened. Let it be Kerry Von Erich not being able to get off the drugs, right? And just not being reliable, right? Magnum
Yeah.
TA getting in his car accident. I'm not saying it's a good thing, I'm just saying luckiness. You know what I'm saying? It's David Von Erich. Maybe if what you said, David wins it, he's more on a straight and narrow, and then now they got someone to compete against Hogan. Maybe Ric Flair's an afterthought after all this.
I mean, you got to give the devil his due, though. Flair was a hardworking guy because, we had Denny Brown on Dan and Benny last week, and I asked him, because Flair, I saw Flair's booking sheet one time for like a 6-month period, and that guy had very few days off. He went, he'd go from Kansas City to Amarillo to Portland to Calgary. I mean, he was nonstop, and he'd spend 4 or 5 days in each territory. And he'd wrestle the top guy, whoever the regional champion was, and he'd go on to the next territory. I mean, that was a tough road, and he seemed to love it and thrive on it. Where a lot of guys, I think Terry Funk, wasn't that the reason why he stepped down? It was because he wanted to spend more time at home. Flair never had
Briscoe too. Yeah.
Flair just got another wife. I mean, some guys like their first wives.
Well, in defense of Jack Briscoe and Terry Funk, when they retired, they didn't go nuts at a pizza place, and so Flair stayed in it for quite a while, and
but he did not mind that schedule. I mean, that was backbreaking. Harley did it before him. Briscoe did it for a bit. I don't think Briscoe even liked it.
No,
but I mean,
no, he said, "Take it away from me."
You had to be a workhorse.
Yeah. Takes a special kind of.
All right, guys, I want to move on to the match that altered your mind in wrestling. What match was it that, I know, Benny, you started with Tanaka and Sammartino, but what was the match where you're like, I'm going to be a lifer watching professional wrestling, Benny?
Well, I mean, that was it. But then, I have a couple. I have when Koloff beat Bruno. I mean, it was in Newsday. It was in the New York News. It was news that the world heavyweight wrestling champion lost, and and of course we didn't know the backstory. We didn't know that Bruno wanted to go home because he had spent 7 years and 8 months wrestling, literally like 28 days a month. We didn't know that, but I would have to say that one of my biggest ones, and I told you about it offline, was Andre and Hulk. Because that was really the true passing of the torch from one era of wrestling to the next. And I just thought it was masterfully done as well.
Phil, thoughts?
Classic. I was there live, but via big screen, so it was so large an event. It almost felt like I was actually there in the building. And Andre, for me, is still probably my number one guy, or number two, or somewhere up there anyway, just as far as being so influential. And seeing him live was off the charts too. Seeing him in his prime, of course, not what he became in later years in the mid and late 80s. Seeing him in the very early 80s was really a sight to behold. So he definitely, I think, made me a fan. But any event where I've been there live and the fans have been off the charts, seeing Hogan against Bossman, a standard title defense, nothing, not on television or anything else, but the pop that he got when 14,000 people go crazy, it's just electric. And and you can go to 10,
Phil,
you can go to 10 shows. Yeah.
Phil, I was there for that match in a steel cage, and I think that's when they were practicing that superplex off the top of the cage, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. Is that the same thing you saw out of the Boston Garden?
I saw it. I think it was in '87 in Worcester, but it was still the same idea. Yeah, it was just it was tremendous, the spot and just the audience reaction. It's funny. I think like you say, we've seen some of the same matches, but at different arenas. And it's the evolution of the art, I think, too. But one of those matches like that, anything electric. RVD against John Cena in 2006, Hammerstein Ballroom. I was there. The crowd in France was crazy, I know. but on a smaller scale and a little more obscenely American than French. The fans were just absolutely, to quote someone I know, they were crazier than a shithouse rat. It was electric. It was unbelievable. And RVD became the first ECW and WWE World Champion that night, which was unbelievable, and it was just tremendous. As much as
I watched that on pay-per-view. That
I was so fortunate to be there.
Match.
Yeah, tremendous. The electricity inside the building was.
I think you know what I think that's why they call him Big Match John.
Yeah.
No matter what, call Cena whatever. Every match that guy had was hot, no matter who he wrestled.
Yep.
Big Match John.
And you know what? And it's amazing and a testament to him. And this was around the time where the fans started to be so polarized, half the arena would chant for him, half would chant against him. It takes a very special kind of person to be able to create that effect, and to have that split, and it's the best of both worlds, I would say. It's heat, two different kinds of heat. It was just incredible. So, and that night, all the heat was on him. Okay, it was all RVD, but Cena was the perfect foil and opponent for him.
That's why Cena is one of the greatest of all time. He, no matter what people feel about him, he's got to be on that Mount Rushmore. I know it constantly rotates because it's a new flavor, but it's like, people may not take this the right way, but you got to put him up there with Stone Cold and The Rock. You have to. Cena has been a machine for such a long time.
Yeah.
And like we said, Big Match John. No matter what, it was Big Match John. I want to go on to the match. I want to go on to the match that is my number one match and made me a lifer. Again, first I want to give props to women's wrestling because I say this to Jimmy all the time. Women have always been the fuel to the fire that ends up being the matches that we love, right? It's always the lead. And you mentioned Cyndi Lauper before, who, really they got to put her in the Hall of Fame at this point. But if everybody remembers the brawl to end it all, Wendy Richter against Fabulous Moolah, right?
Yeah.
That was the lead up to maybe the greatest match. I was there live, okay, but to me, the greatest match of all time, which was the war to settle the score. I told Benny, if he has ever chance, that match still holds up. And it feels so real. When I was at the Garden,
you're right.
Jam-packed, screaming people, everybody's on their feet. The beginning of the match, they're both in the corner. Hogan's in one corner, Piper's in the other. Piper is like rocking back and forth in the corner, getting ready to go. They collide and they just start punching each other. That was the hot. Listen, I love Andre Hogan. Great match. You know what? If anyone says it's the greatest match of all time, who am I to argue? But for Mike Monty's purposes, the war to settle the score was the greatest wrestling match I've ever seen in my entire life, and I've seen a million of them. And I got to tell you, I was thinking about the boot camp match, or the alley street fight between Patterson and Slaughter, like all these great matches. And, again, I'm not even talking about new matches like you were just talking RVD and Cena.
Yeah.
Piper Hogan was unbelievable. And, I heard on an A&E documentary about it that Hogan was pissed that Piper wouldn't take the loss and get pinned because he felt like they could have did much more business that way. And to me, it was like, no. Like, I don't understand this mindset. There's got to be a conclusion to the match.
Right.
It has to end by disqualification or count out. You carry it on, and you keep carrying it on. You keep carrying it on. But to this day, I've got it on my computer. I saved the whole MTV thing, the whole lead up to it.
Yeah.
And I'll once in a while just sit there and watch it because it still gives me goosebumps when I sit and watch that match. It's an iconic match.
it says to everyone else, and we were trying to convince, and we were youngsters. See, wrestling is cool. Okay, wrestling is cool. Look who's watching wrestling. Look, wrestling's on MTV. Okay, this is where it's at. We are now mainstream. It is cool to like wrestling, and that was the launch pad for WrestleMania and beyond. So, it served its purpose. And, going back to that reality sort of thing with anything that Piper's involved with, even the most seasoned fan has to scratch his head and say, is this real? Because it really seemed that way when he was giving Cyndi Lauper the little ride off his leg, the little boot, when he, smashed the captain with the with the record, and of course when he body slammed Dave Wolf, it was just like you thought he might have just snapped and gone off script, and then you had the cops come in and everything. I mean, we didn't know. We were hoping it was real.
By the way, Steve Kotenberg goes, I'm going to have to YouTube it now. Damn right, Steve. You got to watch that match.
Yeah.
And before I go back to the player, one that also sits in my head is when Stone Cold interrupts Tyson and Vince McMahon swings at him, is like, you ruined this. I thought that was real. I was like, because, at the time, WCW was really putting a lot of pressure on him. And I felt like Steve went into business for himself. They got a 30-something-year-old hook, line, and sinker. I was like, oh, my God, Stone Cold just fucked Vince over. Oh, my God, this is insanity. Yeah. Vince is like, you ruined this. Oh, my God, one of the great moments in wrestling history. I can't stop smiling.
That's it. That's the power of a good work, man. It really is, It really is. Yeah.
Player, besides Andre Hogan, what match makes you smile like I was just saying?
I don't know about smile. I can tell you.
When you just think of it.
I'm going to say the opposite of smile, but when, and we're going back to 1980 when Larry Zbyszko, and by then I was, 25 years old. I kind of knew what wrestling was all about. But I still, to me, that was the unthinkable that Larry Zbyszko would turn on his mentor, Bruno Sammartino. And whoever's idea that was, Larry said it was his, but I don't know whose idea it was. But, man, they were printing money back then. And the way they pulled it off, I think, was absolute perfection. And if you watch some of Bruno was never really known for his great promos, but some of his promos on Larry were really, it's like, does he really hate this guy? It really made me stop and think for a second. But it really, at that point, very few wrestling matches evoked the emotion out of me, or, wrestling even scenarios, but that did.
Well, I think it was on your show, and I don't know if you knew this, Phil. This was kind of amazing. I always wondered, because I was just started watching wrestling when that whole feud with Zbyszko and Sammartino started. I always wondered, why Larry Zbyszko wasn't getting pushed. And I don't know who the guest was on Dan and Benny, but the claim was that Zbyszko held up Vince Sr. the night of Shea Stadium and says, I want to get paid this much. I'm not going on. That was the end of Larry Zbyszko. Is that correct, Benny?
Yeah, that was Sal Corrente that said that. Yeah, that's why he didn't get the push.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because once Zbyszko Bruno was done, he was pretty much gone. He didn't. You would think that that would be like a ready-made feud with Backlund. He'd move on to Backlund after Bruno because Bruno never beat him. He won the cage match. Bruno never pinned him. Bruno never made him submit. And that would have been perfect, fuel to go into a feud with Backlund. Geez, the living legend Bruno Sammartino couldn't even beat me, but yet he was gone. So yeah, I do think that was true.
I will tell you too. You made me think about it too. I remember because again, I didn't see much of Sammartino, just like Phil. We got him late in the career, but I will tell you one of the great moments I have is when Savage drops the bell on Steamboat's throat and tries to practically kill him. And in the back room locker interview, Sammartino loses his shit.
He calls him a piece of slime, and he starts choking the shit out of him. Like, you piece of slime. That I still watch that about twice a year. I have. It's so good. And then I think it was Corporal Kirshner was trying to pull Bruno off a Savage. Like, you're really going to pull Bruno off a Savage.
Poor Corporal Kirshner. All right, so as we're drawing to the end, I want to get your top 5 wrestlers that mean the most to you. Okay, it's not the top 5 wrestlers that should be on everybody's list. It's what means most to you. Benny, your top 5.
Got to go with Bruno, of course. Got to go with Andre. I gotta go with Hulk. Got to put Hulk in there. I can't not put Piper in there. Jeez, who does that leave? I'll tell you what. I'm gonna put, and it's a shame that his career, he was a psycho. But Jimmy Snuka, man, if that guy's head was on straight, we'd be talking about him in a whole different way.
Yeah,
what a talent.
By the way, hold on. I did catch a match at the Georgia Championship Wrestling. I guess Michael Hayes and Gordy were feuding, and Snuka was with Gordy. And Snuka's wrestling Kevin Von Erich. This is in Georgia. And he hits Kevin Von Erich with the Superfly. And Kevin Von Erich kicks out of it, and Snuka can't believe it. And I think Von Erich gets disqualified for putting the claw on him and won't let it go. And Snuka's like flailing or whatever. But
wow.
that was cool shit to see too. That's how powerful the Von Erichs were back then. Even they kicking out of Jimmy Snuka's finishing maneuver. Phil, top 5.
Wow. Andre, Hogan, Flair. Oh boy, so many, man, so many. Yeah, God, Backlund for me, and God. Stone Cold, maybe.
Love
so
it.
many. Is that
Love
4 or 5?
I'm gonna go with Hogan, my number 1.
Yeah.
Kerry Von Erich, my number 2. Roddy Piper, number 3.
Oh yeah.
Randy Savage, number 4. And you know, this is a tough one for me, but I'm going to put number 5 as Roman Reigns.
There you go.
Because he's
special.
Like he actually made me enjoy wrestling at a different level at such a late stage in my life. I started looking at wrestling like it was more real than it was when I was growing up. You know what I mean? As an adult, I obviously know it's a work, right? But it's like his matches meant so much for this whole term. I got to put him in my top 5.
Yeah, Roman is very special, and yeah, for the past 5 years or so, I would agree with you. Or even going back even to the Shield days, he's right up there, at the very top. Absolutely. And there's more to come.
One thing I want to share when I was at the big, and you know what? There is more to come. And at first I was pissed that they took the title from him, but I think I see what's happening, and it's going to be, it could be off the hook. It really could be. I did want to share something when I was at the big event. Very few wrestlers do I mark out for, right? If everyone knows, I flew to Florida to go. Hogan had a signing at his beach house. And again, I hear they're much rarer. That's why I went. I didn't want to lose that opportunity.
Good for you. Yeah.
Tony Garea actually gave me butterflies in the last interview. I was a kid again, just like talking to him.
Sure.
But when I was at the big event at the table this last time, Kevin Von Erich was there, and I'm like, you know what? I cannot not take the opportunity. Sky Blue was on. I got to go see Sky Blue, right? We knew we had to do that. But I was like, I got to see Kevin. And I got to tell you, the guy talked to me for 20 minutes. And you know what he said to me?
What?
He said, New York fans, and I think when he said New York, he means the Northeast,
Yeah.
are so much smarter than all the other fans. He's like, they get it. And, we were talking, and he told me that Vince loved his brother, but didn't love the rest of them.
Really?
So they didn't get the ample opportunity to come up here. And I think that might be one of Vince's greatest mistakes. And I still feel if Triple H is smart enough, he gets those kids, he brings them up here, and then he gets a Freebird faction and rebuilds that whole feud again.
That would be
say
great.
It's worth taking a shot.
Yeah, totally. Marshall and Ross Von Erich, and then, the Freebird kids, sure.
All right, before we go, player, who is in your top one most hated wrestler?
Bob Cook.
I was waiting for that answer. Do you have a poem for Mr. Cook to send us out?
You know what? Give me by Thursday when we do our wrestle test. No, give me till tomorrow night. Dan and Benny in the ring. I'll have a poem for Bob Cook.
Okay. Bob's not that bad of a guy, Ben. He's actually a pretty good guy.
For an asshole. Yeah, you're right.
Phil, thanks for joining. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Back.
I missed it, man. Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. This was great. Phil, send us out.
Well, you've been watching New York's finest, Florida's finest, Massachusetts' finest, Monty and the Pharaoh. Peace. Hand signal time for life.